you very much to everyone. I'm glad you are still around. There was so much information presented so far, a lot of difficult things. I am the last presenter in this session, and I'm going to give you a quick overview of a very interesting subject. I hope we will give you the big picture of some interesting concepts. The stuff I will talk about can be explained in fairly easy terms. We will generally talk about optimization of the means of protection that can be used in the domain of cybersecurity. Most people are using some of this. We just need to improve those instruments. The topic of my presentation, if you've listened to Sergey Lebedev, I'm going to follow up on what he said. Sergey did not say it, but let me say this, that there are very few banks that use these technologies, and Sberbank is one of them. So they are a very good example. They can be used as a model. Let me get hold of a clicker, and I will start my PowerPoint presentation. Let us look at the challenges that information security or cybersecurity is facing these days. What we have to address. We have a real zoo of legacy systems, and there is also a zoo of security systems. Most of them use various data formats. Many of them use different artifacts, and there are very many different storage requirements. The databases are growing, and this definitely costs us money. If we do not get value from storing it, why invest in licenses by Oracle, Microsoft SQL, if we do not use the data that we keep accumulating? As a consequence, even if we have a good security operations center and CVM, if we have streamlined our processes, despite all the information that we have so much of, it's still difficult for us to manage detection. It's difficult to respond to incidents. Like Sergey was saying, most people today are focused on risk management. And risk management people are telling us that the biggest information security challenge is when an incident is going to happen. It's not a matter of whether it will happen or not. The probability of an event is always greater than zero. We have to be prepared. We have to understand what we do when an incident happens. And we would like to be able to respond automatically. This can be achieved through data analysis. What kind of attacks are taking place these days? Most people talk about the number of viruses, and it's definitely growing. A computer virus is the simplest thing to deal with. The worst thing is that cyber criminals today are not using malware much to attack corporations. They use various attack techniques. They can encapsulate them in different software, which is not always malicious. And it also can take place without any special software. There's a good methodology. Some of you may be familiar with it. If you are not, then I advise you to do some reading about it. There is a MITRA, Attack 101. It's more than 101. There's about 250 different techniques that cyber criminals are using. at one of 12 stages in any attack against any information system. This is a simplified matrix that includes only 11 phases. Altogether, there are 12. First is getting initial access, then execution, followed by persistence, privilege escalation, defense evasion. Then we have confidential access. That's when they look for personal accounts, then discovery, lateral movement, collection of data, exfiltration, command and control. Then the 12th phase that is not shown here, which is used a lot, is impact.
Unfortunately, we cannot see this on the slide, but I would like to draw your attention to the following. Is one column how to bypass protection means. Unfortunately, we can't see this right here, but that's probably the biggest column, about 30%, 70 different techniques. Out of the all volume, there are 250 in all. That's all about protection bypass. And one of the smallest is the initial access. It can be explained as follows. In order to get access to the target structure, I mean, if you want to get through inside the protected segment, it's quite easy. There are about 14 ways to do that. So you don't have to invent anything new. It's been implemented already. Everything can be bypassed quite easily. But the biggest number of techniques imply protection bypass. They are always integrated, but nevertheless it makes the lives of cyber criminals more difficult. Also, this is a positive feature of that particular figure, but the negative, the downside to that is that there is a counter action to every action, which is due to the fact that, unfortunately, the problems for bypassing something, there are no such problems. However, protection system, security system, any protection system can be bypassed in one way or the other. So no matter how much you're going to invest, how many echelons you would build up, but provided a good financial incentive, a cyber criminal or a group of cyber hackers will be able to bypass your protection system and will be able to entrench themselves within the corporate structure. So despite all our efforts, unfortunately, this is not a real scare for criminals, for hackers. They will never be disappointed and will never go away from this market looking for some other ways to penetrate our systems. Now, talking about tactics, there is a model which has been in effect over the last few years. That's active architecture from Gartner, which basically means that in order to ensure efficient protection from any attacks, from any offensive system, you need to introduce 4 key stages to ensure the security process. First, predicting, anticipating threats and attacks. Number 2, prevention. Number 3, remediation. And number 4, detecting incidents. Well, of course, we've talked a lot in recent time about protection from targeted attacks. And although I'm a vendor, we're not talking about products and solutions, about how they can be used to our advantage. So it's commonly said that prevent is not efficient anymore. No matter what virus you have, orange or green, or how many modules there are in place, it's easy to bypass them. So what we have to do is, rather than prevent them, we have to proceed from the premise that the hacker is already inside and develop detection systems, which means that allow him to infiltrate, to get in, and then catch him, because it's much easier rather than putting up barriers. Unfortunately, this technique has been in effect over the last 4 years, but they have ensured a certain increase in the quality and efficiency of protection systems, but it's not a universal cure. There is no universal cure, in fact. But there are certain approaches that allow us, without raising the level of investments, while analyzing the available data, to resolve this issue much more efficient, rather than investing millions upon millions of dollars in our security systems. So this slide demonstrates that we are talking about predicting attacks, about forecasting. In order to predict attacks, we must have certain means, tools, and methods that enable us to do this on the basis of our previous experience. CM is available for everyone. A majority have CM. CM is a system that collects logs, normalizes them, compresses logs, and finding some suspicious activities on the basis of analysis of events from different systems. However, the modern-day CMs know how to do that, but basically they are not intended to do that. It is a retrospective analysis, whether something like this happened before, whether there was a leak, or it was just another business process that takes place once every 236 days, for example. But it's not an illegal process. So we are now going over to another data gathering model. So we have the IT systems and other systems, and as Sergey mentioned, as Sergey said, that allows us to accumulate and load data, upload data to external sources, but we need to understand what we are supposed to do with this data. So as to build this prediction system, we need to change the storage and processing formats and data processing formats. Unfortunately, or luckily maybe, to accomplish this work, usually unstructured data, the standard database storage systems are not suitable, are not applicable. So we need the so-called data lake method. I'll briefly explain what it means. A data lake is a system that allows you to store structured and non-structured data, indexing this data, and search for this data. The classic SUBD is a block of data, but on the whole, they are not intended for unstructured data storage. So we are talking about here about big, really big storage that will allow us to store such unstructured data, artifacts, screenshots, files, or perhaps many other elements that cannot be stored in traditional, in the normal text or digital field. So here is an example I wanted to draw. Hadoop technology, which is used to build data lake, an open source system from Apache that allows us to build this data file, data volume. So that allows us to build machine learning, analytics, data transfer from CM to CM, and so on and so forth. So this is quite important at this point because that's the first stage that we are supposed to streamline so as to ensure that we have a good response system. The data lake itself that allows us to store large data volumes of unstructured data volumes. But it is not enough. First, we need to build the data collection model. So as we have talked about security mostly and the analysis and management automation of response processes and detection processes, the major data flow should be accumulated using our security means. So here in this slide, you can see that we are talking about security incidents. Security log windows and different incidents in Unix servers. So these are the basic, the key models, the steps that we should undertake at the initial stage. So the technology is quite simple here. It's plain. It does not require enormous resources, especially when it's not such a large organization, not like a Sberbank. But without building the right structure of incidents and the artifacts, we won't be able to analyze anything. We won't be able to build this system of artifacts. So after we worked out on one model and we took models from the data lake, accumulating and analyzing this information, at the second stage we are supposed to analyze and to build the mechanisms of statistical analysis of events, of incidents. So we are can calculate the probability of occurrence of an event based on telemetry. It's NGFW proxy, email protection, endpoints, servers, IoT devices. There must be a DLP system because it allows us to enrich our data lake with file structure artifacts, thus allowing you to understand what these deviations may lead to. If it is like constantly leading to does not lead to data leak, that means that it's some kind of a process that allows you to do this analytic for yourselves. So the identity management system, of course, if it's not been implemented, configuration management database, CMDB system, we must understand what kind of resources are there. We should understand whether it's CRM or just file junk. In this case, we can enrich our system, our data lake, with data on user activities. So we would be able to understand what your employees are doing at a certain point in time, correlating ECP connection or a letter with a certain action in CRM and ERP. That's also important to enrich our data lake. That therefore it allows us to accumulate some data and to create a model of median behavior. So the next step is predicting artifact-based threats. In fact, and the system is capable of So what exactly this business analytics allow us to do? First of all, what we would be able to get is the actual statistical model of median behavior. In this case, you would be able to understand that the organization, in a certain organization, within a particular system, for example, you would be able to understand how many letters or TCP connections are established depending on a day in the week, and what particular actions of the user may lead to certain incidents. As we build this statistical model, the system will then understand what exactly the medium temperature is for the hospital, so to say. So any deviations that will occur will also be accumulated, but unless you identify it as an incident, initially it will be considered as either a standard or deviation from this standard. The next one is the number and severity of deviations from average values that you would be able to identify after the statistical model makes it possible to analyze the data volumes that are available. The next point is the regressive dependency analysis that I mentioned before, which means predicting the values of certain variables depending on other variables. Well, that's a classical regressive analysis, as you understand. What exactly we are supposed to do so as to make this system as highly automated as possible? Well, we have to ensure data enrichment from these attack techniques, meter attack system that I mentioned at the very beginning. And of course, the data enrichment should be accomplished from the threat data feeds, IP ports, files, URLs, attacks, and IOC, which implies that the system should be capable at the initial stage of correlating, comparing this with the standards, and automatically register the things which are somewhat which deviate from the normal criterion. And of course, the system needs some time to learn how to do this and to enrich its data. So maybe 2 weeks or months later, it will be able to underline and to flag certain incidents. And the more data and artifacts are accumulated, and the less false detections you will see there. So what you are supposed to arrive at stage 4, it's automatic response movement. So you're well familiar with these targeted attacks, actually. So they can identify potential incidents in the information system, and then they will ask you, what do you want me to do here? Should I isolate the workstation? Shall I transfer this file to a blacklist or a whitelist? So the system is not ready to assume responsibility for what it's doing. So it's, we building the prediction system will allow us not to influence the system at this point, but to ensure that there is a full automation of this process, as the system will learn what exactly it may do in case of a potential attack. Thus, we're minimizing the number of exploits, and also will give the right, will provide the right for the system to make independent decisions. And what exactly should be done to a particular suspicious file? Should it be added to the blacklist or to the whitelist? Because right now, unfortunately, we have, we have some modern-day systems that require that we do this in a manual mode. Therefore, we are end up with some standardized architecture of data exchange that will allow us to implement the mechanisms I mentioned at the beginning. There are three major components here. The CM, incident event management. We won't be able to get rid of this solution because there's a system of correlation here. And the data lake itself that absorbs data, providing certain answers and solutions, and data feeds that are reached on the basis of external providers. And what is important is the integration bus that is basically intended to streamline the data exchange between data lake, CM, and data feeds, which is a quite difficult task to accomplish because we also have firewalls, proxy business systems, screens, server protection systems. So there's quite a number of different systems that acting jointly with all our correlation and prediction systems have to be integrated. So we need this integration bus to ensure this data exchange among all these systems. So a practical example of operation of this system, well, I wouldn't be able to talk in such detail about this system if Sberbank had not established and maintained the system already. Symantec is using this for the analysis, big data analysis in our infrastructure, and there's quite a big data lake that is also in effect here. I don't know whether it's the biggest in the world, but for you to just have an idea of that, we have about 8 trillion records in the data lake, and about 800,000 records are added every second to the data lake. So it's about 1 billion URLs are added to the data lake. So these data are stored in an unstructured mode, as I said already. So it was quite important for data lake is the building the connection model between files and the machine, file plus machine. All of them have to be linked up. So this binary interconnection is quite large. It's a huge graph of 230 billion nodes between the artifact and the source of origin, so either IP address or the machine name. Thus, it allows us to ensure information security in quite a large company. For Symantec, it's about 11,000 people. And in fact, acting through specific systems, analytic and processing systems, we can use this data for different signatures. For our own products, in-field protection analytics products, and third-party analytic products, as thus allowing us to generate quite efficiently the signatures that implement automated blockage without a risk of false operation. So we have to be sure that this is a kind of a threat that should be automatically prevented or blocked rather than going over to the next stage of execution. Now, to wrap up my presentation, I've tried to tell you as much as possible within this time slot. So I would like to say that despite the fact that the market of information, the security information market, continues to develop ever new means of protection, the attack techniques volume is also growing every year. Of course, we still have a firewall, antivirus systems, but apart from that, there are much more protection media. The number of attacks is also growing. I mean, not just the number of attacks themselves, which is numbered in billions, but I mean the techniques. If you dial up in the Google Mitri.org website, you would be able to see a classification of these attacks. I strongly recommend that you take a look at that. On the other hand, the ways used by cyber criminals to infiltrate our protection systems and both prevent and detect tools are not very effective. And we cannot be 100% confident that we are approaching the 9.9 level of protection. Well, despite the fact that the methodology and the theory of risk management imply that we should be ready to react at every minute, every second, we understand that fast response is quite an expensive matter, because it's about reputation, finances, and so on and so forth. So we understand it's only the prediction model, based on the prediction of techniques and attack vectors, allows you to effectively automate the management of information security policies and the response process. So in fact, if you have CM, if CM is available and a huge data volume, you have to enrich them with artifacts, streamlining analysis algorithms for machine processing, and after a certain time, maybe in a few months' time, you will end up with a model that will help you, apart from that, to forecast what may happen to you in the future, thus allowing you to automate your protection media. And the last point I want to mention here is that prediction will make it possible for you without huge investments in security systems, without looking for a new means of protection or selecting new antivirus or firewall, will allow you to, using the available data systems, operating this data, analyzing this data, and enriching them with additional data. This will allow you to radically increase your security system, which is already quite operable, and to improve also the process of learning on the basis of data that we receive on every minute, actually. So I'm ready to answer your questions. That's about all. Well, of course, it's quite subject that requires deep insight. It's difficult to cover everything within 45 minutes. Please, your questions. Thank you very much. Vladimir Paredin, M13 company. We are dealing with pin tests. And quite often we are simulating attacks at workplaces, and the colleagues were talking about APT attacks when, the hackers can control infrastructure for long periods of time, for many years. But my question is follows. So when an organization turns into a large and more serious organization, so you can link them up to a cloud, or so all logs go into the cloud, or on a local server? So on a local server, okay. Nevertheless, in business processes, if there is a hacker, a perpetrator, so to say, is within such a system, so the system also learns not to respond to his actions. So here we see a situation when an administrator thinks that they've got a nice solution that will protect them from new attacks. but they had not seen this attacker before. But the system, as the system is a self-learning system, so administrators think that the system shows a green path. So what can we do about this? And, it's a good question. I cannot be regarded as a silver bullet anyway. So that's also using threat hunting, PS. It's this protection media is not always as expensive, and all the expensive systems are not that good, or extremely cheap systems. You have to find the golden middle, so to say. So the more paths it takes for the criminals to go there, the more mistakes we can expect from them. So they're trying to get this privilege, and and then they are looking for an alternative system where they can have better privileges. So, but this is not a median deviation. If they even, in case they've been in the system over the last 6 years, and we started collecting this data after 6 years, after we accumulate this model of data, if it's a big company like Sberbank or like VTB, for example, the data can be accumulated quite fast, just within a few weeks' time. But even in this case, we would be able to see these deviations that they try to get through at the next stage, that they are going to commit certain mistakes. So this ideology overlaps with the same ideology of difference between detect and protect. Prevent is when you allow someone inside and then you catch them inside, where they are relaxed. So to get in, to infiltrate is much easier, as we saw. Of course, we have to protect ourselves, to hide from the majority. But those who are ready to spend money, to invest, to enter the system, okay, let them in. But when they are in, once they are in, and when they are so happy that they are inside, they tend to be relaxed. And at this point, we can catch them.
At this phase, the system will not see a deviation, but in the next phase of a kill chain, we are going to detect this violation, and we will classify this as unauthorized activity, and then the protection system will respond appropriately. I hope this is an answer to your question. This is getting late. I don't want to keep you here much longer. If you wish to talk to me, please come to talk to our booth. We are next to IBM and Cisco, and I can tell you more about this approach. Also, at noon tomorrow, we will have a presentation with some technical details on integration bus. So if you're interested, you are welcome to join us at noon. I hope tomorrow we have another interesting day.